by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Hello, Travis.
Hello, Joe.
Pleasure to meet you, man.
Well, pleasure to meet you. I'm a longtime fan.
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess I'm a longtime fan of you, too, because I'm a longtime fan of your story. I'm a longtime fan of, there's probably two of the most famous abduction stories, UFO abduction stories ever. Betty and Barney Hill, and you. Those are the two ones.
Unavoidable. It's nothing I've ever promoted.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you asked to be abducted.
Yeah.
How old were you at the time?
I was 22 at the time.
You were 22, and this was in
75, November of 1975.
So, you were working as a logger? Is that what you were doing?
Yeah. The movie has a crew of 5, but there were actually 7 of us out there. And to me, the idea that people would want to deny that this ever happened is incredible, you know. You have 7 people, all identical testimony, all passing law enforcement lie detector tests. This would have been adequate testimony to convict somebody of murder in a death penalty case.
But you understand why people would be skeptical, right? I mean,
I do. I mean,
completely unique experience that only a handful of people report that they've ever had, ever in their whole. I mean, the history of people. How many people have a story like yours? It's so rare. Of course, people are going to be skeptical.
Yeah, I can forgive that, but you know, when they look at the evidence and say, "Well, never mind the evidence," okay.
What's interesting to me, one of the things that's interesting is you've never changed your story at all. It's always been the same. Since 75 to today, every time you've told it, it's always the same story. And also, the guys that you were working with, you didn't even get along with all those guys.
No, actually, you know, that very morning I'd had a fight with Alan, you know. He'd gone out to my girlfriend's house and told her, dump that guy, come with me, you know. We got in a fight there in Mike's backyard, and he tried to do a spin kick on me and fell on his can. And, you know, Steve remembers that little set too there. So that's that scene in the movie where Alan cuts a tree that nearly hits me. That really happened, you know.
Wow. So they would have had incentive to say you're full of shit. And in fact, when you did get abducted and they told the police thought that they had killed you.
Yeah, they were suspected of murder from the get-go, and that led to a lot of friction at the polygraphs. Alan's mom was telling him, "Oh, they're going to frame you. You're going to hang," because you know, as far as they knew, I'd never show up again. Maybe a mountain lion ate me or something,
right.
And so the idea that it was going to be rigged and Alan was the fall guy led to a lot of friction, but. It was something that they all testified. They were interviewed by separate deputies, but they were basically describing the same thing, but just interpreted. One guy said it was a foot-wide beam that hit me. Another said that it looked like a long blue flame. Another compared it to a bolt of lightning. But they were all basically saying the same thing. In the movie, the beam comes on, holds the actor for a length of time, and then tosses him back. But it was, according to what they say now, I didn't see the beam. I just was unconscious. I just felt this stunning force, and they said it threw me back, 10, 20 feet. And one of the men happened to be looking in the other direction. He said it lit up the entire forest, lighter than daylight. But hitting the ground, I described that in the book, and immediately after this report came out, that we were professional skeptics determined to shoot the whole thing down, This one skeptic on Larry King had two different versions of why you shouldn't believe it. One saying in my book, I described hitting the rocky ground and saying that the medical exam didn't show any bruises. There should have been bruises, he says. And then on the very same show, he says, the ground was covered with a thick carpet of pine needles, which should have caught fire. They should have burned. So you can't have it both ways, but
Right.
You run into that with people that are trying to build a case. They don't care if they self-contradict.
Yeah. So the movie you're talking about is Fire in the Sky, which is a pretty wild movie. And first of all, what is it like to see a movie about you and about this insane experience that you report, and then see it done through Hollywood, where they've kind of distorted some things and taken some theatrical, they take some liberties, right, with the story?
Well, the guy who hypnotized me introduced me to Betty Hill, and she had a warning about don't let this kind of attention. What were her words? Something like don't let them make you into a parody of yourself. So I was always conscious about not letting that stuff go to my head, because I'm just me. I want to be respected for things that I have accomplished, things that I can do, not because of something that just happened to me.
Right. Yeah, well, if anybody you should listen to, it would be her, right? That was her and her husband. That was the first ever real public story. About
that was like 12 years earlier.
Yeah, so she had gone through the ringer already. So let's take it back to the day that this happened. You're 22. You're logging. You're in the woods. Tell me what happened.
Well, it's just when you're done working hard physical labor, everybody's kind of jacked up, and there was a whole lot of chatter in the car. We're just talking away. It's starting to get dark. We just loaded up our equipment. We're headed out, and I looked up ahead, and I saw this kind of glow coming through the trees. First, I thought, no big deal. It was deer hunting season. Thought maybe there was some hunters camped up on the hill up there. Maybe light shining through a tent. It was still something really strange, kind of caught my eye. And one by one, the other guys in the crew started looking, but nobody said, "Oh my God, what's that?" or anything like that. It was just kind of an idle curiosity at first. But when we burst into the clearing, where we could see the source of this glow, it was just, whoa, it was just mind-blowing instantly. I inexplicably got out of the truck and ran toward this thing, but I thought it was just going to take off, be gone in a flash. And
so when you say in the clearing, so are you driving on a dirt road?
Yeah, it's a dirt road. Trees are real thick. This was a part of the contract we hadn't cut in yet, so the trees were a lot thicker there, except for this clearing, and we weren't the only ones that saw it. We found out later. Sheriff had on file people who were in the area that saw it, hunters and fishermen over there at Black Canyon Lake. And the movement that they described was what the crew described when it left. Of course, I didn't see that, but
what did they describe?
They described this glow rising up and streaking off, I believe they said, toward the northeast. There were some people that probably don't want to be public about it, but there was one guy who was just deer hunting, and he worked in military intelligence, and he stuck by what he and his wife saw. They were both together. And another guy that was at Black Canyon Lake, I won't mention any of those guys' names unless they chose to, but found out later that there was more official investigation that nobody talked about at the time. Immediately, though, this was all nonsense, and these guys murdered him, and even my oldest brother, he didn't believe him. He thought they had killed me. What we were doing with the brush that we cut was piling it up. There were piles that were in the clearing so that the Forest Service could burn these piles, when the conditions were right, where it wouldn't spread, wet conditions otherwise, but burning up this excess material to reduce the fire danger in the woods. And my oldest brother was tearing those piles apart. He was certain that my body was under there. And there were some pretty testy confrontations between him and my brother. And I think even my other brother, Dwayne, he initially took that approach, but he quickly became sure that they were telling the truth.
Now, what do you remember when you're going through your mind and you're trying? I mean, this is a story you've told so many times. This is a story that's been turned into a film, which it's got to be very surreal. But when you look into your memories and you try to go back to that day.
Well, I don't try. It's something I try to block out, but it's unforgettable. And there's...
What do you remember seeing when you ran into the clearing?
Well, the whole clearing was lit up with this weird glow. It's really hard to for any artist or movie to try to duplicate the strange glow there was there. Made everything look really, really pretty eerie, and
did it have a color to it?
It was kind of a golden color, but with a kind of a softness to it it wasn't like beams of light shooting out. It was just this haze of light.
And did it seem to come from a specific part of the craft, or? Most
of the surface seemed to be glowing. There were darker areas that didn't give off light, but it was the parts that weren't glowing. It wasn't so bright that you couldn't look at it, but it had a metallic look to it.
So what did the craft itself look like?
It was classic disc-shaped craft. Years later, there was a report. I can never remember names, but this guy was saying that he worked at Area 51, and they had something in there. He worked with the Tester Model Corporation to create a model of what he was describing, and that's actually the closest of any of the other descriptions I've seen. But I don't think these things have just one type of craft. I think there's many, many different shapes.
What makes you think that?
Well, personal experience. I try not to emphasize these other incidents, but I've seen the glowing sphere. I've seen the giant black triangle. Other craft that were a ball of light that you couldn't penetrate the light with your eyes, but
now this is after this experience.
We did as you asked. Where is she? That's one done, but I count 3 reactors.
I think the reason my brother Dwayne was persuaded more quickly than my brother Don was that he saw a craft in those woods. I was probably 10 miles from there while deer hunting, and it was kind of tic-tac shaped, and that's something that's been observed by, in military reports recently.
Yeah. So you see this thing, this disc-shaped craft,
yeah.
and then what happens?
it started to move and started to get louder.
Louder.
Yeah, it was. The guys in the truck heard it too. There was a low thunderous kind of a rumble that you actually sort of felt more than heard. And then there were other high-pitched frequencies. I was talking to a group of students from technical college, and they were really interested in what the sound was like to try to, compare that with theories that they had concerning what might be their propulsion. But the increase in volume, it suddenly got louder as it started to move. And, at the same time, the guys in the truck were screaming, "Get away from there, let's go, get back in the truck, let's go." And, which would have been the smart thing to do. But as soon as it moved, it startled me. And I just ducked for cover. There was a log there. I got down behind this log, and they were screaming, "Let's go, let's go, let's go." And I didn't need to be told. I was just gonna, stand up and run away. But see, when I jumped for cover, I went down and forward to reach where the log would hide me, and that brought me closer to it. So when I stood up, at that point, that was the closest I was to the object.
How close?
It was still like 8 or 10 feet away, from the surface of it. But that was when the energy discharge happened. I've worked on a number of theories about what might have happened. At the time, some of the other guys on the truck were thinking, immediately Steve said, "It got him." Like, if you shot a deer, you got it,
Right.
And so it might not have been, as we assumed at first, that it was some kind of stun gun or something, but maybe just closing that gap allowed this energy to leap to ground through me. And
Like static electricity or something.
yeah, one thing that really weighs heavy in that direction is that when I found years later that they have satellites or something that record the number of lightning strikes, and that area has the highest frequency of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States, except for the Everglades. The Everglades has a bit more, but that's over water. So that adds to another theory. What were they doing there?
So that area that has a high level of lightning strikes, do you think it makes sense that they're observing that, or is that why they were there? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, up until a few years ago, you walk down the rim road, and if you see a tree that's been hit by lightning, you can always see it. It's a strip of bark that's just blasted out of there, and it's all bare, and it can actually still survive the lightning strike, but it turns the sap to steam instantly, and it just explodes out the side of the tree, blows the bark off. But I was at a conference where this lady was. I said, "What's this?" And she says, "That's fulgurite." I said, "What's that?" And she says, "That's when lightning strikes the earth. You've got millions of volts, millions of degrees that form these crystals that aren't formed geologically." So I kind of leaned towards this theory that perhaps they were looking for fulgurite, for a very unique kind of crystal that would be formed by that kind of blast of energy. I'd never heard of fulgurite before.
Can you pull up an image of that, Jamie? I'd like to see what that looks like. I know tritonite is something that happens when they call it nuclear glass. It happens when there is either a nuclear explosion or when asteroid impacts hit the Earth. That's it right there.
Well, these crystals are supposed to have very special properties for people who are into crystal stuff, but
What does that say there, Jamie? This is what happens. That's what can. Wow, that's wild.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. That's pretty wild. So it might be that they were looking for that. Well, who knows? It may be something that they use for energy. What is that? That's really when lightning struck Santa created that thing? That's wild. That is wild. Look at that. It looks like a tree coming out of the sand.
I'm guessing that was wet sand.
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, it's right next to the beach. It must be wet. That is crazy. That's really wild, man. Wow.
So if you ever see one of them, that's where that came from. But
fascinating. So that stuff is in that area. You've seen that stuff in that area?
I never found any. I imagine people have looked for it. One thing in our expedition back to the site, we discovered, well, I didn't discover, I just heard about it later. First of all, Paramount wanted to do an interview at the site. I said, we can't do that. This is winter. There's 3 foot of snow out there. So they went and rented this big snowcat from the ski run. Could go right over the top of snow drifts. And, okay, here's an interview right on the site, being all covered with snow and looking different. We still found the spot. I found out later that Mike, he was being interviewed too. He's the crew boss. He went back the next spring. Never said anything to me, but found out later that he had observed that this one tree that was on the edge of the clearing looked bigger than it ought to be. So he took and cut a core sample out of it, and then very carefully cut a matching piece of wood, put it in that hole, and sealed it up with caulking compound. He didn't want to be guilty of killing the tree, but you could see that counting back, I think it was 13, 15 years, something like that, 15 years of tree rings had suddenly got enormously thicker. All the rings before that, 85 years, were of uniform size comparatively, and then all of a sudden they were enormously thicker. Well, that was end of story for a long time until we went back again on another little expedition looking for Geiger counter readings and magnetic readings and whatnot. That because a forest fire had killed a lot of those trees, we were in the clear to get a cross section of these trees along the edge of the clearing. And these thickened growth rings were on the side of the tree towards the craft. So all the skeptical theories about why there might be a surge in growth cannot explain why the growth was towards this craft and not on the backside.
So there was a surge in growth in not just that tree, but in other trees that were in the same area?
Yeah, all around the edge of this clearing.
Now, has this been studied? Is this...
The lead researcher, she did a documentary called Travis. I would never name something after myself, but she took it to the U of A. The university has a tree ring research lab there. They didn't want to touch it. Nothing connected with this subject, but...
just because of the controversial nature of the abduction story?
Took samples and pictures of these trees in cross-section where you could see this thickened growth was uniquely towards the craft. And Ben Hansen, the guy in charge of that expedition, former FBI guy, did some further research, and he found out that the pine trees around the Chernobyl nuclear accident experienced a similar surge in growth. Now, in that case, the radiation was just raining down on everything, and it wasn't one-sided, but it did show that rather than killing plants, this radiation somehow stimulates a more rapid growth, there was some kind of actually scientific papers he found online that explained the actual mechanism of why there's more rapid growth, but it does suggest a radiation source. Now, when I got out of the truck, the crewman that was sitting in the front seat next to me was exposed because I left the door open. I thought it was going to be gone before I could get 5 feet, and so he was exposed, and he's since developed skin cancer on his right forearm, which would have been probably the most exposed part of anybody left in the truck.
Now he's standing there. You get out of the truck. Once you jump out the truck and you open the door, how far away were you then?
I immediately started running towards it.
Right. How far away was it roughly?
It was probably about 90 feet away.
So it was pretty close.
Yeah, it was pretty close.
And how big was it about?
It wasn't real huge. It was, probably not as big as this room.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So the energy hits you. Whatever happens, knocks you out. They take off.
Yeah. Yeah, they were screaming at Mike, it's going to kill us, let's get going. That part of the movie was pretty accurate as far as what they described, the panic of, and Mike nearly wrecking the truck trying to just, floorboard it. Normally in a rough back road like that, you take it real slow and careful, but he was running pell-mell out of there. But he finally got a grip on himself, he said, and decided that they had to go back. Now, in the movie, when Mike says, we got to go back, the crew doesn't want to go. So they get out and wait. Well, that didn't happen. When Mike said, if you don't want to go back, you can wait here for us, nobody volunteered to wait. Everybody wanted to stay together, stay in the truck, and they all went back.
That's what I hate about movies.
Yeah, they were changing important facts, who murdered who.
Yeah, they do that kind of shit. Taking liberties with an actual story, but that's neither here nor there. Right?
But
so
we got a remake in the planning stage.
Oh, do you?
Well, I've talked to a number of people. Some people say do it now, and I'm saying, well,
be a good time to do it. A lot of interest in UFOs right now.
It's higher now after 45 years than it was even at the time.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with that New York Times story that came out a couple of years ago, and then Commander David Fravor's account of that Tic Tac shaped object that they chased off of San Diego coast. So they go back. And they all get in the boat, or the truck rather. They drive back, and you're not there.
They were terrified, they said, and of course, they only had one flashlight, so they said they were all just clustered together, making a search of the area, calling, see if maybe, when they found my body wasn't lying where I'd fallen, they looked to see if I'd crawled off into the brush. Didn't find anything. At one point, Mike fell to his knees and was crying. Now, one of the crewmen, I won't even say who since he was offended by it, didn't like the report that he'd been crying when it happened. He was so embarrassed by that, he was furious, and I don't think he still got over the idea that anybody told that he cried. But I think every one of us cried in some way or another at the time, so there's nothing to be ashamed of. But
some people were taught by their daddy not to cry.
Yeah, and he's determined to
pretty silly.
Don't talk about that.
So what do you remember from that moment on?
When I regained consciousness, it wasn't real quick. It wasn't real walking right up. It was real slow. It was dim. My consciousness was kind of like in and out for a while. I didn't know where I was. The pain and the feeling that I was mortally wounded. Something was so wrong inside. I felt like I was dying. And this is what really fueled the panic when I finally laid eyes on these creatures. Of course, all of the mental programming that we get from Hollywood that
Find your max.
aliens are invading monsters, you know. Didn't help. But I instantly associated this feeling of dying with pain with them.
How did you
So
get
I was
access to
combative
base?
immediately.
I know why you're here. You want the German girl.
Where were you?
I was lying on my back
You restored
on a
facility
raised
power.
table.
I'll hand
There
over
was a
your
light
supply.
above me.
Heck, you better have Maxis ready for transport.
It was not real bright. It was not so bright that I couldn't,
down.
see the outline of the fixture, but
What did the fixture look like?
kind of like that, only much larger. Just a soft glow, and in the movie there's a little bit of striking on the part of the aliens against me. That didn't happen. I lashed out at them. The one closest to me, I felt really weak. I didn't have enough strength to do much. So when my arm contacted him, he just fell back very unexpectedly easy into the other one. And I rolled off the table in the other direction. And they came around the table, and the three of them were coming towards me.
Throwing C4.
And I just grabbed something from behind me, an object off of the shelf there, and started swinging it at them.
What was the object?
It was just some large, long cylinder or rod, glass, some clear material. I wasn't studying it. I was looking at them and swinging wildly, screaming threats. They stopped. And I was planning on attacking more fully, just making way past them. The only doorway I could see was on the other side of them.
And it looked like a doorway?
Yeah, it looked like a doorway, just
And what did they look like?
Brain eat her drop.
I guess it's a pretty typical description nowadays. Very large eyes, hairless, two eyes, nose, mouth. I didn't see them speak or no change in the expressions. And to me, that in the face of all the screaming and the fear that I was projecting, their lack of reaction probably just added to my panic. But
Did they feel like they were a living creature, or did they feel like they were a robot?
That's
Like,
one done, but I count
well, they
three
were without
reactors.
expression, I'll
Guess
say
we can
that. But
confirm now.
you know, I've had 45 years to think about that. In more recent years, I think, well, maybe if they're telepathic and it's developed enough to where they don't need to talk, they also don't need facial expression.
right.
And so their ability to communicate with each other would be much richer and more complete than we have. And speech and frowns or smiles or whatever would become obsolete pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, that is a theory about where human beings are headed. If we continue to evolve, that we will one day reach this point where the biological limitations of our monkey bodies will slowly start to fade away, and we'll have different abilities to
Well, why
communicate.
would we need to frown or
Yeah.
smile if you can say much more?
And also, their musculature, did they look like smooth, like they had no
They-
clear muscles?
Yeah, they were pretty smooth, very light. When I hit the one, it fell back into the other one pretty easily, like he weighed hardly anything.
Like a little kid?
Yeah. That was the most terrifying experience of my life. But when I tell this story and try to relate to people, I'm trying to communicate what I experienced and how utterly traumatic that was, and how it was so devastating. I was, on the verge of catatonic for weeks after it happened. But I don't want to relate this story in order to inspire fear. because I've had enough time to think about it that I think that it was unwarranted, that my reaction was just due to my ignorance of the situation. The fact that I was returned at all is pretty significant, you know?
Yeah.
The idea that these beings are just kidnapping people willy-nilly and doing terrible things to them, I don't subscribe to that theory. Now, I try to separate what I actually experienced from things that I've concluded just from thinking about it. But it seems to me that, they've been seen, observed, there have been sightings for all, before I was born.
Had you heard of the Betty and Barney Hill story before you were abducted?
I probably had. But if I thought if they had some sort of sinister intentions, it'd be a done deal. They wouldn't be sneaking around, hiding, and I believe with that level of technology. Look at it this way. Human beings, just virtually everything technological that we have is just a few hundred years old. Before that, the most technological thing we had was fire. And in just the last 50 years,
Tango fully
the
acquired.
progress of our science has grown to far overshadow everything we had accomplished in thousands of years before that. So I'm thinking what astronomers tell us about these other star systems is that they could be hundreds of thousands, millions, or maybe billions of years older than us. So if we accomplished the kind of technology that we have in a few decades, what is possible with millions of years of development? I mean, we couldn't begin to recognize what they're capable of.
Right.
So I think it's presumptuous for people to say, oh, they could never do that.
It really is an interesting conundrum because we know what we can do and we know where we came from. We have a very clear history of technology when it comes to humans. And we also know that there are planets surrounding stars all throughout our galaxy and all throughout the universe. But we're still skeptical. It's so funny. And
Yeah,
so
it is.
But for a guy like you who's actually encountered it, even though you saw it, it had to not seem real.
Oh, yeah, you're questioning your sanity for sure. I mean, it was like I was practically catatonic for days afterwards. A big step forward, a big improvement was the hypnosis. The whole process of hypnosis is a sort of a deep relaxation at the same time you're confronting these memories. That helped a lot.
The problem that people have with some hypnosis sessions is that you can be led into false memories.
True. And I think that does happen. I think, having been at many UFO gatherings, I think some people are mistaken about their experience. I believe, and this is just my personal opinion, understand, I try to stick strictly to what I experienced, and then my own musings, my own philosophy that I've had 45 years to develop. I think that probably some people do have extremely unique dreams that seem so real that the actual physical event didn't happen. And I've tried to argue with people about how evil their intentions would be, and I'm saying, the decades that we've been having these sightings, with that sort of technology, if they wanted to replace us on this planet, yes.
Yeah.
I don't think that, and I think they're so advanced that if there's sightings, it's not an accident. It's not like they slap their forehead, humans spotted me again, I have to be more careful next time, No, I think they'd be perfectly capable of being undetected. We never have any. I think these little glimpses are probably a generalized customization that we might need as a species, but maybe on the other hand there's some more individual interest. And I used to be really skeptical. I'd hear stories where people were describing them as having some particular interest in them, and I'd think, I'd tell them, that'd be like them walking by an anthill and saying, "Oh, I think I'll have a conversation with that little ant right there."
Right.
Humans are a bunch of savages, but at the same time, I believe they probably do have. If you saw one when you were 8 years old and you see one as an adult, they know it's you. Their ability to process data and retain it and store it is beyond anything we can imagine. I think we're on the verge of that kind of paradigm shift with something I would call the computer brain interface. The minute we can do that kind of thing, it's kind of scary about the possibilities. But I've been at conferences where people talk about these beings as being predatory or evil. One guy was trying to tell me that they capture people, dissect them, and dump their body. And I said, "Oh, okay, name one." And he goes, "Well, so-and-so." And I go, no, not the guy who puts this theory out there. Who's the victim who was found cut to pieces? And then I said, "So name one." And he gives me another name. It was still somebody who's promoting this theory. And he just didn't get it. I said, what's the name of the victim? And he couldn't come up with one. So I'm skeptical about that.
Well, anytime there's a fantastic subject, whether it's UFOs or psychics or Bigfoot, or you find these people that just want to believe. And it's very disheartening. There's something about that. Like, it's hard to separate truth from fantasy with a lot of these folks. And
I think there's a lot of fantasy and delusion going on. And I have encountered other people that I do do believe had legitimate experiences. But
My team's reaching the village. Where are you?
I wouldn't consider them in the majority, and that's an unpopular view. But
no, I share that view. I'm not completely skeptical, but I'm skeptical enough. I also know that it's an aspect of human nature where people want to tell stories that make them unique without actually having to have done anything special in their life. They want to be special, and some people tell stories that make them out to be very special because they've been chosen to have this unique experience with an extraterrestrial. You haven't, they have, and it makes them, it satisfies these delusions of grandeur that some
and I
have.
Personally try to downplay that aspect of it. I say I really favor the idea that this was an accident. It was precipitated by my foolish move of getting too close. I believe they probably just took me aboard in order to correct damage that they were part of that was even unexpected for them.
So did you have physical damage that you could see?
No, but one thing that leads me to think that all of the repairs they might have done weren't complete was my initial EEG brainwave scan. And this was done at the same hospital where Muhammad Ali did his, and it was very, what do you call it?
Irregular?
What's the term? Double blind. Dr. Kandel did not tell the technician what I was in there for. And so he wasn't looking for some particular thing that would support or deny my experience. So he just described an unusual pattern in the brain that in another brainwave scan years later wasn't there anymore. So
what was this unusual pattern?
I'm trying to think of the exact wording. It was a bisynchronous wave alternating from front to back. I remember those words, but I have the report from both EEGs. So I've been interested in finding someone who might have been hit by lightning, or some electrician that raised up against a wire and had a huge amount of energy come through the brain, and see if an EEG compares to this weird pattern that they're describing there. But there's a lot of speculation open, and I, of course, have done trying to figure out what happened there. And there's some amazing things that sometimes, I try to stick to the stuff I can document, stuff that where I have other witnesses, and that, documentable. That's what I go for. And I have this information concerning the EEG, documents of it,
So, were you dressed when you woke up?
Yeah.
So you had
I
the
was still
same
wearing
clothes?
the same clothes that that work clothes from that day.
But
now, my brother had the presence of mind when I came back. He had me take all of those clothes, put them in a clean bag, seal it up. He's going to be for examination later. But there was such a hellfire after us for days. I mean, when I went to do the MRI,
Yeah.
we were driving out of the parking lot, and there he is, they screamed, and followed us through traffic. It was just crazy, the level of fear. And I think, although I know my fear was explainable, justifiable under the circumstances, I try to downplay that, because I'm not trying to tell a spooky story. I'm trying to tell people, look, NASA told us just this last year, see, there's been this thing called the Drake equation. It's an estimation of the number of possible habitable planets in our galaxy. Well, they didn't know what numbers to plug in. How many stars have planets? Well, this last year, NASA said, we now can say with great confidence that every star has about a dozen planets. And they do this on the basis of, they can't actually see the planets, but they see this rhythmic dimming that a planet going between us and the star will dim it by a certain percentage of luminosity. So they say it's a virtual certainty that every star has about a dozen planets. So that raises the number of possible civilizations in our galaxy, in the universe, astronomically. No pun intended.
Yeah.
But based on the estimated age of these star systems, some of them are actually vastly older than us. Now, I make the point that there's probably some aliens who are cave aliens. Those are not the ones that are coming here,
Yeah.
The ones that are way, way, way ahead of us have somehow figured out how to make the giant leap between there and here.
Yeah. I want to take it back to being inside that craft. So you remember lashing out at them. You remember swinging at them with this rod that you found. And what do you remember after that?
Well, the feeling of suffocation may have been some inadequacy of the atmosphere in there. It may have been some kind of injury from being blasted in the chest area. That's where they said the beam hit me, impairing my ability to breathe in some way.
There was no damage to your clothes?
No burn holes or anything like that.
Was there any damage on your body that you could see? Was there?
No, just the only trace of prior injury would be, and some dehydration. But other than that, just the MRI.
So you have this moment where you lash out at them with this clear rod, and then what happens? You feel like you're...
They suddenly retreat. They leave the room. I come up with a theory. It's just my theory that this squirmy feeling in my head had to do with them trying to gain some sort of control or message of soothing or some kind of telepathic sort of thing that wasn't working. And that would be because I was hit with this blast of energy.
So describe it like you felt like they were trying to communicate with you?
Well, it was jumbled. It was squirmy. That's the best I can describe it.
You're filled with anxiety and fear.
And I didn't feel reassured by what I was feeling. It was horrible.
But what makes you think that they were trying to reassure you, though?
Well, I in a little clues.